Welcome, everybody, to the Becoming Invaluable podcast. It's great to be here again today with all of you, and we hope you're enjoying the book out there and finding it in stock. It's been out of stock a few times, but it's out there. And today on our podcast, first of all, I'm really pleased to be here with Terry Lyles, my co-author, and thank you, Terry, for being here with us. But we're really excited to have another one of our spotlight interviewees from the book, Tim Mitchell. And Tim, for those of you that might not know him right away, I'm going to let Terry introduce him a little bit. I'm sure Terry's going to ask him to give you a little bit more background, but it's really exciting to hear Tim's story and how he became invaluable in the world of what you see maybe hanging behind him there, of the guitar world, the music world.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you, Steve. It's great to be here. And we really appreciate people seeking out the book, because we did have, some shortages because the run on the books were pretty interesting, and it took time for Amazon to catch up, and now they know we exist. So it's a little better now. But yeah, so we have 9 people we interviewed, and, we put them into 8 chapters. And Tim was one of our interviewees because we wanted to find somebody in the artistry music world that we considered invaluable. And Tim and I have a mutual friend in contact, Frank Lahaj, and that's how I know Tim from years ago. We used to live downtown Brickell together, downtown Miami, on that area, and we all met. Yeah, exactly. That was some good times. Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast that we probably won't get into now. I wasn't married then, so that's a whole nother thing. So we had a blast. It was good. So Tim Mitchell, I'm going to let him share more, because I can't even do justice to the people he's hung with, because I'll forget like 2/3 of them. But he currently, still works with Shakira and writes and plays bass and does all kinds of interesting things. You've worked with Gloria Estefan, Emilio Estefan. You were roommates, which is really cool, with John Secada. I think, are you guys hung out in Florida together, right? And
we went to school together. We went to school together. Where a lot of this stuff in my world kicked off through relationships that were built in high school,
absolutely,
and then in college. And as far as like invaluable, those particular moves in my career were without a doubt, invaluable. The people you meet along the way, and
absolutely,
it's just incredible, really. Looking back.
I want you to start with this, your whole story of, your dad and your grandpa that we talked about in the book, and how important that was. But you were with Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band, Barry Manilow. I'm going to miss a bunch of them, but you can pontificate as much as you like. But you're just a very interesting person, and we considered you, after I shared with Steve your background, like the other interviewees. We wanted people that were interesting, and you obviously hit that list. So share a little bit about how you got into music versus.
Well, I don't know if I can live up to all that stuff, but I grew up in Detroit, and yeah, my dad was a doctor, and my grandfather was a physician, and they both, my grandfather sort of founded Henry Ford Hospital with Henry Ford in Detroit. My dad, and he was an orthopedic. My dad followed in his footsteps, but I think my dad really wanted to be a vet. So I don't know what the pressure was there. But he did his residency in Boston as well. Because I know, Steve, you live there, but I don't know what music was inspiring to me. And it's funny, Bob Seger was someone I grew up listening to and would go to concerts, in junior high school and go see him play at these arenas. And it was incredibly surreal to end up, still, having a limo pick me up at my house where I grew up and take me to the arena where I used to go see Seger and play with him then.
Wow.
It was like really the pinch yourself kind of reality. But you mentioned I play bass, but I do play guitar. Guitar is my instrument, but I do play some bass as well. But I guess, I was always inspired by music, and a lot of it was because I had older brother and older sister, and they were into music and records and all this stuff. And I, got into all kinds of jazz and rock and, Zeppelin and the Who and the Beatles, of course. And back then, music was such a huge part of everyone's lives, so I think every neighborhood had like a little garage band or something, and that's where it starts. So that's kind of how I got into it, just inspired to do that.
And that's why we wanted you in the book, because as we continue to develop through this podcast on how this all came about, I know Steve has some questions as well, and comments, because we felt that the whole premise of the book, Becoming Invaluable, is how do you become that je ne sais quoi. There's something about that individual that is special, and everybody has that specialty. It's just finding it and bringing it out, and that's what we tried to develop in the book. So Steve, I'm just fire away.
I'd love for you to share, Tim, a little bit more about, you were into music and everything, but when did you first know this was going to be a pathway for you?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to say, but it's something that I think, I would read these magazines and these articles and interviews of guitar players and musicians that I admired. And the main thing was just I learned at an early age, like when I was 11 years old, that I needed to pretty much spend all day, every day playing guitar and learning music.
11 years old. Wow.
Yeah. Because so then you have your skateboard, so you go skateboard and then you practice guitar all day. You skip school, you practice guitar. You skateboard home and practice guitar.
Yeah.
So I was very, I think I felt the need to be recognized in a way, and I felt the best way to do that was to be the best. At least you start trying to be the best in your neighborhood, then the best in your city, then the best, and you keep going from there. And so I had a whole schedule, of what I practiced. I tried to do 8 hours a day, probably from when I was about 13 onward. And then I think school was kind of getting in the way of practicing, and I would go out of my way. I'd try to create classes that I put a band together at the school, and I did this. And so I found a music school that I could go to for high school called Interlochen Arts Academy. Which was amazing. They didn't have a guitar program, but you were just surrounded by art and musicians, and these musicians were dedicated like I was. So it was inspiring again, just all these people, in practice rooms all day practicing, and then your class schedule is, jazz studies, composition, arranging, ensembles, all this stuff. I didn't have a guitar teacher there, so I kind of just taught myself. And we didn't have the luxury of YouTube back then, which, I can't even imagine what that would have been like to have access to anything you want to learn. So I just had my cassette player and my turntable, and I had to learn by ear, note by note, how to play whatever song or solo or something, transcribing like that. So that, that's kind of, I don't know if that answers your question. Maybe I'm getting off base.
I also, one other follow-up question I have to that is that I think that high school somehow led you to the University of Miami. Do I have that right?
Mm-hmm.
Was that, and what you're just talking about from 11 or 13 years old and all the work, and now we're high school, now we're going to talk about college here in a moment. I don't know that people always relate to the amount of effort, the amount of dedication that has to be made by people who become invaluable in what they do. It truly. So I think it's just fascinating, and that we're tracking from 11 years old on here. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the University of Miami too.
Sure. Well, I met someone. There were a few music schools that people were going to out of Interlochen. You'd go to like either, mostly they were classical players, so they'd go to Juilliard or Curtis. But there was a guy who came up from University of Miami who was an alumni of Interlochen, and he was a guitar player named John DeFaria. And he just, I heard him play, and I was in 10th grade at the time, and he was just incredible. And that was my first idea or thought about maybe going to University of Miami. So eventually I did go down there, and he was, I think, a senior by the time I got there. And there was sort of a string of people that would go from Interlochen to University of Miami, because there was a very famous jazz school at the time. And that was pretty much what I was interested in. So, I mean, I auditioned for different places and ended up going to Miami, which turned out to be, very pivotal, of course, because I'm living in Miami now. And it's just, I have to say, like, putting yourself in the right situation also, it adds to that invaluableness, because it's one thing to be very good at your craft, right, but there's a lot of people that are very good, but then there's do you want to hang out with that person, do you want to work with that person, do you want to, and then who's this person in relation to where you want to be, like basically I would tell people, students or whatever, who do you admire, who's like your idol, how did they get there? Imitate what they did. So when I was a kid, it was like, well, John McLaughlin practiced 8 hours a day and did this and this, and so that's what I did.
That's cool. Yeah, in Miami, I mean, interesting enough, like you said, I mean, following your dream is one thing, but creating that reality with your dream, which is what Steve and I embarked upon in this book, because Steve and I aren't young guys either. We're just out there. We've been doing this a long time. I think we're pretty good at what we do. But
Absolutely.
we wanted to share other people's stories to say, my 10-year-old son is invaluable, but how does he become invaluable in whatever it is he wants to achieve? So that's kind of where all this started with Steve and I, is our kids, our grandkids. It's like, man, we got so much wisdom just because we've been alive long enough, and we've failed enough. And we've been around enough weird people that you go, I don't want to do that, and I don't want to be like that. So sometimes it's failing forward, which is one of our chapters that we go through. So
I know.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Go ahead.
No,
Tim.
go ahead, Stephen.
I was just going to say, for those of you out there that might be wondering, if you read the book, you may be aware of this, but just in case you're not. So Tim's tattoo on his right arm is 38. Because he's on page 38 at the end of the first chapter, because this is what really was fascinating about your story, Tim, was how you found this what you had value in and what intrigued you early in life, but you continued perfecting this. And I don't think I'll ever forget this. And Tim, I don't remember what number you were in the 9 people we interviewed, in what order, based on everybody's schedules. But what's really fascinating? You said it, and every single other interviewee said the same thing. Failure is not an option. And so or a failure can't be an option, right? And so I'm just curious, when you look at this, I'm sure you didn't have all successes. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about maybe some of those things that didn't work out like you hoped, and also to then share a little bit about what really were a couple of the big successes.
Well, the path changes as different doors open. When I was a kid, I wanted to be in Led Zeppelin and live in a castle in the English countryside like they did, right? So I became, I tried that a lot. I had a lot of bands, and we wrote a lot of songs, and we tried, and ended up like with many bands that are together. One guy gets a gig, another guy gets a gig, you go sideman, do this or that. So that's kind of what happened to me. My first gig, sort of while I was in college, was a group called Expose. They were a big dance group in the late 80s. And that, again, they had auditions, and everyone auditioned, and I did get the gig. And at that point, that was great. That was fantastic. My first official tour on a tour bus and doing TV shows and, traveling around the world was amazing. You just didn't care about anything because you'd had a guitar in your hand, and that was all that mattered. And you were getting paid. So as that goes on, you start to build up. Of course, you're a guitar player, so all your money goes into guitars and equipment and gear, and you're not saving a lot of money. So I did that, and along this time, I started to really get into the idea of producing and writing. Being like a record producer, like a Mutt Lange kind of thing, or Quincy Jones.
Mhm.
So I started to go, really seek out opportunities where I could write with someone, if I could write with an artist, if I could write with another guy who's producing, or this kind of thing. And all this was going on. This is around the time when I met like the sax player for Bob Seger, and all these things were just kind of intertwining, back in the beginning. And I was going out of my way. If I had a break from the Expose tour, I would go work with Alto, the sax player, and do something. He was into writing, so I'd go there, write. Then he introduced me to the rest of the band, and this was all back and forth for a long time. But I remember I did, let's see, I did the Expose tour. Then I did Barry Manilow for a little while. Then I jumped on the Gloria Estefan tour. And after all that, still, I was in a very small efficiency studio in LA, and I had no money left. And I was, after a few months of, nothing going on, just that thought of, what am I going to do? And failure, like you said, is not an option. I didn't know how to do anything else. So you're just like constantly making calls and trying to put yourself in that situation where something will evolve and come out of it. So, you're in your apartment broken. That's when John Secada called, like at the nick of time, literally, and said, "Hey, I'm going on the road. Do you want to like take over and for the guitar player?" And I was, yes, of course.
So
then I
was that
jumped
a
on
moment,
that.
Tim, was that a moment where you were like in some bit of disbelief or losing some belief or anything when he called, like you said, as a low point?
It
Yeah.
was. I mean, I didn't know
Tim
what
shared-
you're thinking about. You're thinking of which guitar can I sell? What piece of gear can I sell? What do I, how much is my car worth? Uh,
And
and
Tim, share who John Secada is for some people who may not know, that's out of the Latin space. And he's phenomenal. I mean, I have CDs
yeah,
of
he
him.
really broke. He was a background singer. We went to school together, and it's I mean, I could tell you like the way I got into Gloria Estefan, the Miami Sound Machine, was through John DeFaria and the other guys in the band who also I knew from University of Miami. Secada got on that gig as a background singer because he also knew these guys from University of Miami that ended up being in the Sound Machine. And then so I did that tour where John was our background singer, and they were working on his first solo record. That ended up just blowing up on SBK. And he had, I think, 4 top 10 hits, just, mind blowing. And he became, this was in the early 90s. He had Just Another Day and Angel and Do You Believe in Us? And he was, we'd go, I think we sold out, 3 Radio Cities and 3 Universal Amphitheaters. And, it was like that, not arena level at that point, but a big artist.
Right.
So, and in the Anglo market, much more so than the Latin market, really.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's interesting too that, I'd love to hear a few minutes of, Steve, myself. I mean, Steve's a very successful entrepreneur, has, run a business and multiple businesses and done very well. And we all meet a lot of interesting people, from CEOs to board members to athletes, professional athletes to music people. What is it like? Because you mentioned the Bob Seger thing picking you up, and I think you lived in Grosse Pointe at the time, because I did 10 years in Detroit as well. I was just north of there. Yeah. So what's it like to be on stage with like Gloria Estefan or Shakira, and you're doing your thing that you love? I mean, while you're playing, do you ever go like, this is pretty cool?
Well, I mean, yes, quite a bit, actually. I'm very appreciative. And I'll tell you, man, there wasn't one night with Seger that I didn't, playing night moves and just in that moment that I didn't appreciate it 100% and say,
Wow,
it will never get this cool. That was it, because that was my dream.
Yeah.
I'd go see Bob Seger as a kid, and to be that guy and be on stage and be his lead guitar player playing those songs, it was just, and I did appreciate it.
I'm gonna go.
The saying, how do you get a musician to complain? Get him a gig. It's because musicians are notorious complainers, for sure.
Right.
I gotta go look this up, because I have numerous Bob Seger songs on my favorites list. Right. I'm gonna go find where you're the guitarist.
Well, yeah, I wrote. I started writing with him, so we were writing a bunch of songs, and I ended up with I think I've got 4 or 5 songs with him, and one that was somewhat of a hit was called "Lock and Load." And that was on the It's a Mystery album. But I also played on the Greatest Hits album. But this was right when I was just getting in with Seger. And he was such a nice guy. And he was like, I got to get you on the Greatest Hits album, It's so my original experience with him was in the studio for a few years. So I'd be out with Gloria doing tour. I'd come back, go in the studio with him, because he didn't tour for a long time. But then going on tour and playing those, the old classics, Kathmandu and Hollywood Nights and Night Moves, and just unbelievable. In a band, I just
well, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question, because I called that the kind of the days of awakening, and I think we've all had them in our careers where you're doing what you do and you love it, and then you kind of step outside of yourself and you look back at yourself while you're doing it, and you're like, wow, this is like what I dreamt of doing. Like, I stepped in to my dream that now is reality, and I think that's the becoming invaluable piece. And we wanted people to realize that everybody has a dream, but can you make that dream your reality? And it's real. Reality is real. REAL, right? So what is real with you? How do you do that?
I mean, I'll tell you, because it's I can't say that it's easy, and there's so many people that are more talented than I am that maybe have not had the success, but I never pictured that I wouldn't succeed, that I wouldn't be there. It was never I never imagined not doing what I'm doing. You know what I mean?
Right.
I never imagined, it never occurred to me that I wouldn't succeed, which is kind of bizarre, I guess. But there's a lot of luck involved. I'd say it's mostly hard work. But there's a lot of luck. I mean, how do you get the first single on this record? How do you put yourself in the situation where you're writing with the artist and you're writing this song? And how do you? It's the navigating is intense, and relentless, of course.
Well, and I think that's part of our point that we tried to stress in the book was, if you want something, there has to be a foundation. And, so invaluable is health, strength, and worth. Like, how do you build that self-worth and that performance excellence? You have to have health and strength of who you are, what you do, and the excellence you create from it. That's why the triangle is there, is because that was the whole point of this book, is that's why we wanted to interview you in the book like we did the others, because everybody had their own story of, well, I don't know, I just didn't quit. I never thought I would not do what it is I'm doing. So, I mean, I know with you, Steve, I mean, we've had so many conversations over the years. I mean, you're relentless, I mean, practicing 8 hours a day is not even that's he calls me all hours of the day and the night, and we're doing stuff. So it's what it takes.
That hard work is Tim, like you were talking about, the hours you would put in. I mean, I always had a philosophy that there's 2.5 days in every day, and you still get to sleep 4 hours. And so that, 2.5 8-hour days, and you still get to sleep 4 hours, no problem. Yeah. And so, but if you aren't willing to put in the hard work, usually those lucky moments don't seem to come about. But you brought up navigate. Our subtitle to the book is is called "Develop the Willitude to Navigate Success."
Exactly. Yeah, I like the phrases you coined.
We made up the words because we're artists too.
Negotiate.
Like you. We're not like you. We just make them up and it becomes, so now they're words in the dictionary. So my son will always know Steve and I made up some words and
hey man, not everyone can say that. Seriously.
We just proclaimed it. We just did it. So we just made some music and whatever. It is what it is.
There you go. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Negotiate.
But that you said how there's so many talented people out there.
Yes.
And maybe more talented than you are, but you had the willitude. And you also found a way to navigate your way through, because part of this is about being able always, I mean, at the end of the day, business is about people, right? So I'm just curious about, so you found a way that separated you from the others to be able to communicate in a way that made it work, right?
I think it's incredibly important, just to your relationship, the way you relate with people, basically, and how the feeling they get from you. And are you someone who walks in a room and makes people uncomfortable, or you're someone who walks in a room and puts it back together? You know what I mean? So I've done a lot of gigs as a musical director for a lot of different groups, and with Shakira for like 25 years now. And a lot of that is being, I don't want to say like a politician at all, because, but you've got to deal with all these personalities, and there's a lot of odd personalities and conflicting situations. And there's different, you've got your production crew, you've got your band, you've got your lighting crew, you've got your front, your sound crew. Everyone's knows each other, but there's a lot of people that have to get along, and that whether you're making a record or whether you're touring's tough because everyone's traveling together, and traveling together is not always easy. Everyone, when you get to the high, like the A level of touring, everyone is pretty much, they're pros. So there's usually I say not a lot of conflict, but there's always keeping the peace is you've got to keep the artist happy and keep the turmoil down. And if there is turmoil, it can only be caused by the artist and no one else, basically. So
yeah. I think one of the last things I want to ask, and Steve, you can finish up, is, when you're working with, and I know, Steve, you've worked with CEOs and executives around the world, with your company, and you walk into a room, as you said earlier, Tim, and you realize that these people are really good at what they do, but yet they're listening to you. I do this with athletes as well as, corporate people like Steve, and you walk in a room and you're like, I'm either threatened by that or I'm challenged by that. And that's part of what we tried to share in the book is, how do you navigate that? Like, you walk in a room, like the Bob Seger thing. I mean, that was me meeting Roger Penske and Emerson Fittipaldi. And I mean, you go like, they're icons, but
I'm not worthy. We're not worthy.
But you want to act normal. You don't want to go like, oh, can I get your autograph? Dude, you're going to pay me. I can't ask for your autograph. You got to like put that in check. So what is it like?
You do. There's a fan and then there's a colleague.
That is, speak a couple minutes on that, because that's a big transition for people that may be trying to become invaluable in their world, but you can't be starstruck and overcome with, wow. You have to be able to harness that in this health and strength standpoint to say, I belong here. You called me.
Yeah. Because you'll make someone like that uncomfortable if you're a fan and you can't control your excitement or whatever. I mean, you're a fan and this and that, but you've got to be like able to hang and relate to that person. I met Paul McCartney a few times, and that's mind blowing. But the first time I met him, I didn't ask him anything about the Beatles. I just said, hey, because it was after a show, and I was like, hey, the band sounds great, man. What's that thing on your guitar? It looked like a Red Wings sticker. Is that this? And that? we talked for like 20 minutes just about, how's the tour going, and how's, whatever, how's the vegan world or whatever.
Exactly, whatever you're
and
into.
And that was the first time I met him. Then a couple of years later, I was at the Hit Factory or Criteria down here, and he was doing something there. And the guys in his band were like, "Hey, Paul, this is Tim Mitchell," and he was like, "Paul, I know you. We've met before. Well, I remember you with whatever." And I was like, "Oh, hey, super cool." And anyway, I think the worst thing I could have done would have been like, "Can I have your autograph and can we take a picture together?"
Oh yeah, you're done. It's like, and see that you took yourself, if you do that, off the Invaluable stage to becoming normal. And Invaluable is not normal. Invaluable is elite. And, just briefly, I'm sure Steve share a quick story, but I remember the first time I worked with an IndyCar driver at Indy, where I grew up, like you in Detroit. I was 8 miles from the racetrack and used to ride my bike there to go look through the fence as a kid because I couldn't afford a ticket to even get in the track. And the first time I was at the Indy 500 with a driver and a team that was paying me, I mean, I was a mess for a bit. I'd go in and out of this. I can't believe this. I got to work. Like, I got to put that someplace, and I
snap out of it.
Yeah, you got, and it's so hard to do that you can't get caught up. You have to be caught up and be ready. And Steve, I know you've had so many examples like that.
I have a very simple way of doing this to help also wrap up here, because I think we're fast approaching our time. I used to always say, I was in the supply chain consulting business, and we needed CEOs to make a decision to hire my company. And because we were a small company, nobody knew who we were. And so we needed that CEO to step out and do that. And I would always ask our people before going into a meeting, so how do you feel about walking into the CEO's office? And usually I would get an answer like, "Oh, well, they've been really successful." No. You have to know you belong in that office with that CEO, so they can see you as a cohort, right? As a colleague. I think you used that word earlier, versus seeing you as another person trying to sell them consulting services. And so I think that's what I hear you talking about, is how do you got to know you belong, and you got to, even if you're nervous and you might not feel that you belong, you got to go in there and make them feel that you belong, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
and that's so. And it's amazing how easy it is to sort of enter, if you have the right attitude, to get in that inner circle and be accepted is not that difficult. If you're just on that kind of same level, and
that level is
with them. Once you're, it's amazing how quickly you can just be hanging with them and not feel awkward.
Right, and that's the beauty.
Them feel awkward.
Yeah, well, that's what I love that, and that's the beauty of it, is just being able to know that, like Steve said, I belong in this room. I may not be the smartest guy in the room or the most interesting guy in the room. Doesn't matter. I am invited to this room. I have something of significance that I'm going to offer that betters the room. And it all comes down to what we talk about in the book, Becoming Invaluable. Be the best you can be. Practice.
And what do I need to do to stay in the room?
Absolutely. Well, that's this Invaluable. That's what it is. It's doing page 38, baby. So listen, we got to wrap up. We could talk all day, but listen, there's very few times, Steve, that I could say, and Tim, to you, that you're a rock star. I say that tongue in cheek with people, but we could really say you're a rock star, and you're in our book. So we're honored and privileged to have you a part of becoming.
Well, being in your book might make me a rock star, but there's no posters on the wall. So
yeah, we'll work on that.
Tim, by the way, is there anything that you wanted to share with our audience in terms of things you're doing? I know you're with Shakira and all of that, but anything you wanted to mention of how they might reach you or find you or
well, yeah, I'm best is on Instagram, The Real Tim Mitchell. Just
The
all
real
one thing.
Tim
The real
Mitchell.
Tim Mitchell. And I've got this studio going on here. We build these clouds that are sound
Cool.
clouds
We've been admiring those.
that every studio has. I've got a new single out with with Kaijo and Ava Max called Whatever that just came out a few weeks ago. It's basically a remix of a song that Shakira called Whenever Wherever that was a few years old, of course, but this is brand new, so check it out.
And that
Pretty cool.
that can be triggered through your website or through your your Instagram rather.
You could, yeah. I posted it, so yeah.
The real Tim Mitchell. Not that there's a fake one, but the real Tim Mitchell. I love that.
Well,
man.
Tim Mitchell was taken, so you know the gig.
I do. I do.
If only we'd like harnessed all these, websites and names before people grab them.
Well, listen. This is
these
part
domain
of my
names.
This is part of my consulting. I have Braden is 10 years old. Before he was born, I already had his domain because that is your electronic birth certificate. And you know what?
It's unbelievable.
You got to get it, man, because somebody will buy you and sell you, and you'll make nothing from it.
Or you'll have to buy it from them.
Or you'll have to buy it from them, and they made something from you. So, all right, whatever. It is what it is. So, Steve,
it's a crazy world.
It's a crazy world. And listen, becominginvaluable.com is where people can find us. We love what we're seeing with the book. We have starting.
It's inspiring.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that.
It is. No, I read it. It's great.
Yeah. We got it. So we're going to do, as we go through this, you're part of this podcast. It's going to be one of these months. We may not do them in order. We're just kind of doing them and mixing it up and making that interesting.
Well, thank you guys for having me, though. Thank you for having me in the book and having me on the podcast. I just want to say that for sure.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for being a part of this. Steve, thank you. Anything you want to say? Becominginvaluable.com is where you can find us.
I just want to say thank you, Tim, for joining us. Thank you for doing the interview for the book. It's great to have you in it. It's really great. I look forward to someday we can hang out and have a little fun together. Maybe we'll figure out how to do
the Caribbean.
Yes, maybe we'll figure out how to do that on the boat. And and Terry, thank you so much. I mean, you bring such expertise to all of this. This world of developing yourself is just a fascinating aspect for me in my life, and I've really enjoyed it. And I love helping other people be successful. And Tim, we can't thank you enough for joining us and helping us get this message out to. We hope we affect a few people's lives. That's what we're all about. So, whoever you want, check us out again at becominginvaluable.com and take care.
Talk to you soon, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.